Uh, Bias is Behavioral Insights Architecture and Strategy, which is a behavior change company based in New Delhi. And Monk Prayogshala is a not-for-profit academic research organization based in Mumbai, India. The study was supported by both. Hi, everyone. I'm Anirudh. I'm going to be talking today about our survey study of migrants in India and their COVID-19 disease threat perceptions. Um, Migration, of course, is very important in a country such as India, and it has nearly 139 million migrant workers who typically work in the informal sector. The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, as you might have read in newspaper reports as well as the media, has affected these vulnerable sections of our population quite significantly. Nearly 40 million migrant workers, some of them had to travel back to their native village or town on foot from their urban centers of work. And there have been sort of some descriptive evidence that seems to suggest that rural locations suffered the most, as well as large losses of employment on account of the lockdown associated with COVID-19. So one of the things that we're interested in looking at is what is the perceived disease threat of COVID-19 among this highly specific population. And we hypothesize that this will affect their decision to remigrate and return to work in the centers of economic growth, which are typically in the cities. And we try to combine this with some work on risk and time preferences, which have been shown to also affect perceptions around disease threat as well as potentially the migration decision. We did a telephonic study with around 500 individuals that all male who returned to their villages or their local or their native towns following the lockdown in March. The survey happened sometime in April and May. We captured some data on migration, but also on COVID-19 threat perception, where they got information from on COVID-19, as well as some factors such as social networks, as well as some behavioral factors on risk, time preference, loss aversion, subjective well-being, etc. Here's the main sort of specification that we're attempting to test empirically. So the return decision, return to the city, is going to be explained by the duration of migration, because literature in migration, especially in India, suggested that how long you typically migrate also affects the potentially your risk perception of returning to the city, as well as COVID-19 threat perceptions and some behavioral factors and social demographics. This is the data that we have. Now, the main issue here is that both the willingness to return as well as COVID-19 related threat perceptions could be jointly determined and therefore endogenous. And we try to sort of address that a little bit by looking at the role of social capital and about how that might affect the disease threat perception in a particular way, has been shown earlier in the literature. Our key results sort of point to the importance of the number of prevention strategies, for example, that respondents were correctly able to identify, as well as information sources on COVID-19 that kind of tell us how it affects the disease threat perception. Some of the social demographic factors, of course, such as dependency ratio, as well as if they own more land, these are more established, perhaps, migrant workers as well. And there's the duration of migration. So the longer that you are to typically migrate to a city, the lower you estimate your chances of COVID. Some of our behavioral factors also turned out to be significant. So typically, if a respondent has more present bias or is more impatient, they're more likely to report that they want to return to the city, but also that they are more likely to get COVID. The loss averse kind of more loss averse individuals report that they perhaps don't have as much of a chance of contracting COVID. Perhaps some relationship there to risk measures as well. This is our main result. So basically, as we go along the curve towards the right, we see migrants that rate themselves with some chance of, or any chance really, of contracting COVID, as well as being a longer term migrant, actually have much stronger sort of reluctance to return to the city, whereas those who are sort of more shorter term migrants, as well as those who do not report to have as much of a chance of contracting COVID-19, say that they're perhaps somewhat more likely to return to the city. We did some robustness checks. I'm not going to spend time on this, but it kind of sticks in terms of how we define disease threat perception as well. And that's kind of the key takeaway. And this is our links to some of the other studies that seem to suggest that that seems to suggest a little bit more on mechanisms. I don't have much more time, but we'd love to hear your comments and your thoughts on it. Thank you so much.